Hey everybody! Woo! It is Saturday. It is hot outside here in New York. I am having a wonderful day. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. So I'm super excited right now, you guys. Super excited. We have a wonderful guest, and don't tell me that I completely got rid of his bio here. So I'm gonna have to have him explain his bio because apparently it just disappeared from my thingy here. But my guest tonight is just, I'm so excited to talk with him because he is so cool, so laid down to earth, so brilliant, and pretty much wrote the book on the subject that we are going to be talking about tonight, which is Stregoneria, right? I hope I said that right. He'll correct me if I didn't. And we are going to be discussing sort of the ins and outs of Italian folk magic. And I'm really hoping that you guys have some really great questions for us because I'm excited to hear from you. Now, this man, and when I say wrote the book, I literally mean that, plus a bunch of other books. Let's talk about it for a second. Let's talk about it. He has written, let's see, here we go. He has written these right here. You ready? Not a great picture, but these are 4 amazing books, one of them being Crossroads. And I would say about 5,000 blogs, I want to say. He's a doctor, a naturist, an animist, a healer. I mean, you run down the list, that's him, okay? And his wonderful name, which is super sexy and I love saying it out loud, is Gianmichael Salvato. Beautiful. So without further ado, let's talk about this. Let's do it. I'm excited. Here we go. Boom. Hey! I totally butchered your bio because it disappeared from my thingy. So can you just tell us who you are and what it is that you do, just so that they know, so I don't feel bad about the bio?
Sure. Well, first of all, don't feel bad about the bio. The bio is just what they put on the back of the book to identify me. But as you said, I've actually written 10 books, 9 of which are still in publication. I am a lifelong practitioner of Italian folk magic, which is most commonly called Stregoneria. But as we say on a lot of my videos, I kind of make the name sound a little puertorriqueño and say Stregoneria because YouTube will closed caption what I write or what I say, and so Stregoneria on YouTube will often show up as stray gonorrhea, and I just can't handle seeing that on my videos. So I kind of changed the pronunciation of the word, and it makes other Italian speakers crazy when they hear me say Stregoneria. But I just think that's so much easier than seeing stray gonorrhea show up on the page. And like you said, I'm a naturopathic physician, retired. I practice multiple forms of natural healing, folk healing, counseling, therapeutic counseling, and nutrition work. And for the last 25 years, a lot of my time has been spent on research into the various forms of Italian folk magic, because there's not just one form. It's not like Wicca. It's not like British traditional craft. It's a very broad and often really diverse and beautiful tapestry of magical practices from all over Italy and Sicily.
Speaking of which, so when you say a tapestry of magic and practices from all over Italy, there have been a few words, like a few key words that I notice when you describe your folk magic. Like you'll use words like crosswords, or you use words like rootwork. And whenever, at least for me, from my culture being from the Caribbean, when I hear those words, they're like special words that have to do with Afro-Caribbean sort of things. And I'm like, so when I see Italian rootwork or Italian magic at the crossroads, I'm like, what does that mean? So I'm curious to know a little bit about the history of this and where and how you kind of put those words in there.
Sure. That's really a fantastic question, because and it's a question that, depending on where the person is from that you talk to, you may get different answers. A lot of people, and this is a really important moment, I think, to talk about this. And so let me say as I begin, that from my heart to the hearts of all of those he's touched, in a very special way tonight, I want to acknowledge and raise to power among the ancestors Representative John Lewis, who lost his battle to cancer and now walks tall among the mighty dead. And he was a major influence and friend in my life. And I had a Kodak moment a few minutes before we met up online, because I just found out. I just checked my messages on my phone. And so I want to start by saying that. But some places in Italy, racism exists a little more rampantly than it does necessarily in Sicily and in southern Italy. And so recognizing that, for example, Santeria is an Afro-Caribbean, practice. In the same way, Italian folk magic, when I say Italian folk magic, I really mean Sicilian folk magic.
Okay.
And the Kingdom of Sicily, which included all of southern Italy, so Napoli, Pompeii, all of that area. Montecorvino, where my family lived last before coming to this country. All of that is Afro-Siciliano folk magic. So it's African and Sicilian folk magic. And the mainland Italians have an expression where they say that a Sicilian is an African who learned how to swim. And we wear that as a badge of honor. My father's very dark skinned. And so a lot of our practices have their roots in the very same place that Yorba has its roots, in the very same place that Santeria has its roots. And so when we translate that to English, some of the best words that I could find in writing my books was root work, because the work that we do, and I had the privilege growing up of being able to spend time with a lot of the grannies and magic men, medicine men in the Appalachians. And I was like, holy shit, this is what we do. This is the same thing that we do. The plants, that we work with are the same. The practices are the same. The only difference is that most of like the hoodoo type root work is rooted in rooted in biblical anchors as substitutions for older magical practices, where the practice that I do is more secular, so it doesn't have that. But in Italian folk magic, they have an equivalent, an exact equivalent of hoodoo, which is called segnatore.
Interesting. So, if we can compare for a little while, just to kind of get people's bearings together with that, do you guys utilize the Bible in any way? Is it kind of similar to some of the hoodoo practices? Do you guys, or do you have your own sacred text, something that's different in your practices?
Well, that's, again, another great question, because it depends a lot on the region that you're in, the age of the practitioner, and the I would sort of say the culture that they grew up in. So there is a group of practitioners of Italian folk magic that would fit most closely with what I call Stregoneria, because it's more of the ancient animist type practices. Within that, there are different components that have become over time different things. So one example I just talked about is segnatore. Segnatore is something that's found all over Italy. It's probably one of the most recognized terms or agreed upon terms. And in English, we would say in a way that it's physical, like body sigil work. So segnatore is a motion that's made with the hands, combined with a spoken word, and in the traditional segnatore, the spoken word is always relative either to a biblical scripture, or to one of the saints, or to one of the persons of the original Trinity, which was a father, a female, and a son. So the Holy Spirit was Sapientia, was wisdom, and was always female until much later in Catholicism's evolution. If you go to Russian Orthodox artwork, you'll see the Holy Spirit's always portrayed as a woman. So the original Segnatore will reference those things, and so then there's a spin-off of that a guy called because it's something that's a lot of the old folks from Napoli would call Benedicaria, and Benedicaria is sort of the practice of it's very close to Santeria, where we hide the old stories beneath the veneer of the Catholic saints. So you've got that, but then you've got the more animist practices. So under Segnatore, the one that most people that are familiar with Italian folk magic know is the removal of the maloicchio, the removal of the evil eye. That's Segnatore. In the rest of our practices, it's about relationships with the plants. It's about relationships with the spirits in the home, the relationship with the spirits of the elements. And with naturally, because we're Italian, with food. So it's sort of a kitchen witchery for the female side, and it's a reliance on hermeticism for the male side. So hermeticism goes right back to Egypt. So again, there's that Afro-Italiano.
I'm glad you brought that up, because as you were describing some of these practices, from sigil work to, certain movements with your hands and mudras and things like that, the first thing that was popping in my mind was, oh, wow, that sounds very ceremonial. And yet we're talking about folk magic. So I'm wondering, when you said, oh, some folk practices that are female and male. So that kind of brings me to my next question. I mean, is there a division of practices based on gender in your culture?
Yeah, in our culture, in my personal life, no. We could talk about that in a minute. But in the tradition itself, the women would do the both with Segnatore and in the other traditions, in the more Stregoneria type practices. And just so I'm really clear too, I should have said that depending on what region you're in Italy, the path that we walk is called by different names. It might be called Masca, it might be called, Strega. It may be called a bunch of different things. But when you look at the ancient, the older practice, being called a witch or being the practice being called Stregoneria, witchcraft, is really something that people from the outside did. It was the label that they gave us. Amongst ourselves, we would call it just our way, or maybe you would say, "Oh, I'm going to do a little fallo santucci, do a little holy thing." You didn't really call it witchcraft, but you knew what it was. You knew it was magic. So there is, and I talk about this in the 9th book in Magic at the Crossroads. There is a conflation that takes place mainly because of American pop culture witchcraft, and that is the imagination that ceremonial magic, which is a religion, that ceremonial magic was the same thing as witchcraft. And so the way I like to explain it is, in our tradition, ceremonial magic was the old religion, and if you walked into a Catholic church, the first person you see might be the priest or might be a bishop, but everybody who's in that room is not a priest or a bishop when they go to Mass. So they're going to Mass to do their worship, their devotion, however you want to call it. Likewise, the ceremonial magic originated in Tuscany was devotion to Diana and Dianus, or Diana and Faunus, or depending on your region, what they would call them. And that's where we get the mythology of Aradia. So that's ceremonial magic. And then in everyday life, that was where you went to, quote unquote, to church. We called it a boschetto, a grove. But in everyday life, the women would do the magic in the kitchen with the healing herbs and making the potions and removing the maloicchia and all of that stuff. The men would do the more what you might call in English more manifestation magic, and that was relying on hermeticism. So in the religion, there was a male and female role. But also in the practice of witchcraft, there was more of a male and female role, and that was what I set out 20 years ago to break.
Interesting. So I'm actually curious to know the ceremonial part of it, which seems to be very, what's the right word? Like almost scientific in a way. It seems very structured. Is that something that you could potentially say kind of across the board all through Italy would be the same, but the folk magic would be the thing that kind of varies from lineage to lineage or house to house because it's kind of like different where they live and whatnot? Could I say that?
The ceremonial magic is really just the religion, and it has nothing really to do with witchcraft at all. It's the backstory or the origin story, allegedly, of where the witches came from.
Gotcha.
But it's more tied to to mythology and religion, where the people who are practitioners all have personal relationships with the gods and goddesses and demigods and spirits. And that relationship is seldom, unless you're a part of the old religion, it's seldom a religious relationship. It's usually more a personal relationship with Hecate, with Diana, with Lucifer. It isn't the kind of thing where, okay, I go to church and I pray to Diana, and then on every day I make offerings to Diana. That's not witchcraft, that's religion. And so that's where in America, well, actually in England originally, Gerald Gardner started the foundation of Wicca and started to conflate and mix witchcraft with ceremonial magic that were two totally different things and turn them into something new. And to be clear, that's not bad or good,
Right.
not for me, but it's just something that new, that evolved, as did things like Stregaria and all of the other mythological Italian practices that never existed before 1950, 1960.
So how many lineages and houses are there like in Italy? I mean, Italy's a pretty freaking big place. So like, how is there a lot? Is there, because I'm assuming that just like in many other cultures, there's not that many original lineage houses, but there are many subgroups, all the branches that kind of fell from it. I'm assuming that's the same with you guys, or am I completely off on that?
Yeah, there's, according to the mythology, and there's some pretty good evidence that this is true. In the male side, the study of Hermeticism, there's one school and so one house. And that traces itself back to the cult of Isis and Horus and Osiris. And so we can kind of set that aside and say there's one teaching that fits all there. And the Kabbalion in the modern day world pretty much captures most, I would say, of that. In the actual kitchen magic and garden magic and all of that, there are supposedly three main mysteries or schools. So there were three houses. There was the house that was solar based, the house that was lunar based, and the house that was stellar based. And the legend goes that we split all of that up so that nobody could be captured and reveal all the mysteries. You might get somebody from the stellar mysteries, they're going to tell you their part, but none of them really make sense unless you like in a big sense to answer simply Lucian's question about what's Italian dark magic like. None of those practices by themselves can qualify for what Americans would call left-hand path, because until you understand the interplay of all of those energies, you can't really be effective in the. Is that thunder?
That's my end. Yeah, that just came out of nowhere.
There's nice
just when you were talking about dark magic, there's
nice confirmation. And so for me personally, especially, I don't, Italians don't look in terms of, or don't talk in terms of dark and light magic. And we kind of feel that that's kind of a racist concept, that construct that started in probably England or thereabouts. So there is that energy that is, we like to call it lunar energy compared to solar energy, and so for us, you can't really master the night until you understand the interplay of all three of those energies.
Interesting. So when you were bringing up this idea of Aradia and the mythology of the practices and the ceremonial magic, whenever I think of Aradia, that's Charles Leland, right? The author, Charles Leland. So, I remember back in the day, this was like back in the 90s when I was in the city, and New York City, sorry. People forget that I'm from New York. And I remember the big controversy with Charles Leland, whether or not it was not real mythology or real mythology, whether it was made up, not made up. And I'm curious to know your take on that and what that particular mythology, the role of that in the overall Italian practices.
Yeah, so to understand that, you have to, and we've got some really great questions that are coming in from Simply.
Don't worry, we're going to get to the spirits in a minute.
We will get to them. So that's a great question. Essentially, Charles Leland was one of the most phenomenal folklorists. Now, one of my first doctorate before I went into medicine was in theological anthropology. So I consumed lots and lots of Charles Leland's work outside of Italian folk magic. And so here's what I know based on being an Italian practitioner, and that is that we would never tell an outsider, what we would call in Italy an American, and he was in fact an American from Philadelphia. We would never reveal secrets to them. But what we would do is we would say, there's the boschetto where the old religion gets practiced, and you'll meet some witches there, without question. Why don't you come? So he went to the boschetto and he in Tuscany, and he saw the liturgy of which is no different than the Catholic have their liturgy of the Last Supper, no different than other traditions have their liturgies where they reenact or tell the story of blah, blah, blah. And this story is an ancient story. So the story of Diana and her brother Dianus, or Lucifer, who became lovers and gave birth to Aradia, is an old story. The part that's new that most Italians would roll their eyes at is the idea that somehow Aradia came back in, depending on the story, the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, and revisited Earth. I mean, that those people were influenced by the Bible when they came up with and she came back.
She rose from the dead.
we roll our eyes in terms of that. But the story is an ancient story. It's based in Etruscan folk magic. The names changed. So when Leland heard them, it was Diana and Dianus. Earlier than that, it might have been Diana and Faunus. Earlier than that, it might have been Tani and Uni. But these, and if you follow that story back far enough, and one of my big challenges was I would love to know when the third character went from being a male to a female, because the story is essentially the story of Isis, Horus, and Osiris. And when did Horus become Aradia is an interesting question. And if we really dig deep into that African mythology, we might see that there's some indication of gender fluidity there. So maybe that's what happened as a rising against patriarchy all the way back thousands of years ago. The story of Aradia might be a beautiful kind of rebellious story. But for actually the practice of magic, we don't really necessarily, it's not that we don't buy into it, it's that it's kind of irrelevant, because we believe our magic comes through our bloodline, and in a bigger sense that every person has the ability to be, to tap into that magic. So when we say bloodline, it's not that, look, Gianmichael's got all of these magical powers because he's, an 81st generation witch. It's that I had the benefit of having teachers and people there to support me, where some people, their families might disown them. But they may turn out to be much more powerful and much more adept than I could ever be in this lifetime. So that's what we mean when we say hereditary. That's what we mean when we say lineage. But we truly believe every single being on this planet is magical, because we believe every single being on the planet is one.
So when you spoke earlier about these lineages and about these practices, and I'm curious because many people are so interested in Italian magic, folk magic, and I know that we're going to get into sort of the vocabulary and the differences between what is and what isn't, but I'm curious to know, and I'm sure a lot of people are too, is there an initiatory practice, or can you approach this from a solitary perspective? I mean, since it's coming down through lineages, I mean, you would assume there's an initiation involved, but I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you have to be Italian in order to practice? And if so, what's the process of being able to get into that? Or is it something that you're like born into?
And again, I'm just going to stop saying that these are great questions because they're all great questions. This is really just an amazing opportunity to share. So the answer is kind of a little bit of all of those, because in certain paths, certain practices like segnatore, for example, segnatore is taught to you between sundown on the 24th of December and sunrise on the 25th. It's most often taught at midnight, most often either midnight or right after the midnight mass. It's only taught by someone in your bloodline. It's one of the few practices that, depending on where you are in Italy, some people say it could be taught to a male, but it's only taught to one person per generation.
Oh, wow.
So that's really and it is very initiatory. When I was 6 years old, and it's taught to you when you're 6. When I was 6 years old, that was when my my training began. And there wasn't like the kind of, when we say initiation, it's not like ceremonial magic where there's, mystery school stuff that's involved. That doesn't really generally begin for you till you're 13 to 16. But in the segnatore tradition, it was an opportunity to begin to open the door to the learning. Now, some of the other traditions, I know my aunts and cousins and things like that, we kind of taught one another like in everyday life, because there wasn't a like, okay, let's go into the magical room and start training, because Italian folk magic takes place almost entirely in the kitchen or an outside hearth. The tools that we use are all tools that you find in a kitchen: scissors and wooden spoons and knives and bowls and things like that. So it's very organic. So you may learn, for example, why we eat certain foods on certain days of the week, and so the grandmother or the aunt or whatever would tell you the story about why you always make the gravy on Sunday, and then Monday is beef, and Tuesday is chicken, and Wednesday is the leftover gravy with the beef that was left over from Monday, and there's a story that goes along with that. And so, but nobody says, okay, now it's time for magic class. But then some of the other things, like Simply Luciana was asking about, so you don't work with the dead. Those are things that generally the grandmother will talk to you about in the evening. And in the old days, it was by the fireplace or by the fire or the fire pit outside. For me, growing up, the summertime was a place of learning so much of this tradition, because I would go and spend the entire summer with my aunt and my aunt's two sisters and my grandmother down the shore. And so we were on the Jersey Shore, and every night there was a fire, and every night, we weren't even cognizant of the fact that it was initiatory teaching, but that's why the stories were being taught. And some of the stories I would notice as an adult were just taught to certain ones of us, and other stories were taught to all of us. So it depended on what they thought that person was going to do with their life.
And that's determined usually when they're around 6, during that first kind of like, wow. Yeah, because I would assume, I mean, at that age, you can kind of tell who has the gift, who doesn't. But let's just throw an example out there. What if you, as someone who is teaching your children, see that both of your children or all three of your children have the gift, but two of them deny it and one of them want to practice? What do you do with the other two? How does that work?
Well, that was funny that you should ask that, because in my family that was the case, because there were a group of us who went down the shore, a couple cousins, my sister and I, and not everybody was on the same page. We'll just put it that way. And so the ones who weren't the same page, you just allow them to follow their path and for that to unfold. Now, somebody might, and this is where, to finish answering your question, this is where, as an adult, I began to say, okay, the tradition is beautiful and it's who I am, but if a tradition is living, if it's dynamic, then it has to be able to evolve with the postmodern world. And so for me, some people don't come into their own and don't wake up until they're 16 or 18 or 25 or 30 or 40.
Yeah.
And so why should we hold things back from them? Some people weren't born Italian. Some people, we say, when I was growing up, we would say there are two kinds of people in the world: those who are Italian and those who wish they were. So what about the ones who wish they were? Why should you hold something that's this precious, that's this powerful and this amazing back? So for us, it just seemed to me that we're not supposed to start teaching publicly till we're 50. I honored that for the most part. I was lucky because I was the one who was chosen from my generation to enter the seminary, to become a priest and later a bishop among the Beneficaria, to protect our practices. So I was able to kind of teach some of our stuff hidden beneath my homilies, and like all the Italians got it and the non-Italians didn't. And that just made me sad, because I wanted to be able to say, enough of this bullshit. To answer another of Simply Luciana's questions, we don't, in our tradition, we don't necessarily use the Bible, but we use all things. So that can include the Bible. So when I teach, a lot of times I will take teachings and say, now let's look at, forget everything you heard about this passage. Let's talk about what it really means. Let's talk about the mystery school meaning behind it. So I might teach those things. I might also teach, Tamara just asked what foods on what days. There's a whole video on YouTube about that, Tamara, which I'll be happy to share with you, because we'd be another hour here on what foods on days.
Yeah, his YouTube channel is ridiculous, you guys. Definitely jump on it for sure.
So I think, that it's very possible for a person to have that family connection and initiation. Somebody else asked, Susie Allen said, if you have Italian ancestry, how do you find out what lineage you have? If you have it, because you'll be told. But what if you're not told? Or what if, a dear friend of mine just told me today that she was denied any of the teachings because she's not gender conforming, and is queer. So she was denied all those teachings. That could have very easily happened to me as a non-gender conforming, gay male. So I could have had those things. I was fortunate that my aunts and uncles saw that and said, "Oh, this makes him special. So we're going to teach him the male and the female traditions." But in the 21st century, this is bullshit. We need to stop. Yeah. We need to teach everybody everything and let them say, this is of value to me. This isn't so much of value. I'm hungry for this. I'm not so hungry for that. And to know that down the road, you can pick up on the part that you weren't hungry. Maybe you pick it up a little bit later.
Since you're kind of breaking the mold here and really allowing this to sort of be across the board without any discrimination, whether it's gender, whether or not you're Italian, whatever the case may be, which I applaud you for. I think it is just so honorable and so awesome and so needed to model these kinds of eldership I think that's the right way of saying it, because so many of our elders in various initiatory practices across the board are just so close. And I get it. The protection of the secrets and protection of the sciences of your culture and of the magic is so very important. I totally get that. And there are people out there who will take and take and take and abuse, and you can't really filter that out, unfortunately. But you know, I think it's worth the risk. It's definitely worth the risk. And with that said, though, what can a solitary person who may have some Italian ancestry but doesn't know their maybe they were adopted, or maybe they were mostly several generations of American, and how would they go about trying to learn these practices? Would they come to you?
They could. You know, some of this is what gets me in trouble with what I like to call the Italian racist Illuminati, and we won't mention any particular parts of Salem for identification purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the folks who think the bigger the hair, the closer to God, always watch out for them.
Thank
except
you.
in the 80s. But this is why they get their horns twisted, because they don't want people to be solitary practitioners, because what happens when you're a solitary practitioner is you start to ask questions. And one of the questions that comes up most often is, why do I need so-and-so, this teacher? You know, I'm ready to go on. And that is the cash cow that so many of these practitioners lose out on. So that's why they create documents about the do's and don'ts of witchcraft. That's why they create documents about, claiming that they can control volcanoes. All of this nonsense is to make you scared of leaving them. So in my world, people can come and take a class. I have two 26-week classes that I offer. The 101 class goes over, and it took me probably a good 10 years to be able to find a way to do this, because the challenge was, how do you take stuff that you learned when you were 6 and teach it to an adult that in a way that doesn't bore them? Because some of what I was told when I was 6 would evolve years later, and I would be told there's a little bit more to that story we didn't tell you, and a little bit more. So you can't just go to the end story, because it doesn't make sense. You have to find a way to make these things really relevant and accessible to everyday people. And then you have to take out the gender bias. And then somebody said, Marius asked, how come Italian immigrants in the UK and USA didn't teach their kids the language? Well, again, that comes down to the fact that when most Italian immigrants came here, the vast majority of the ones that originally came here were from southern Italy, from what we would call the Kingdom of Sicily, which was Sicily and Napoli, the whole southern part of Italy. And we were dark skinned. And so we understood that we were Afro-Italiano or Afro-Sichulo. And so the language itself had a stigma, because it identified us with people who were being oppressed and who were thrown into the same bias as our darker skinned brothers and sisters from Africa, Saudi Arabia, from the Caribbean. And so what happened was, a lot of Italians who came to America started to marry lighter skinned people, which resulted in our skin lightening. And by that time, so much of our culture was lost. And so many, Italian wasn't allowed to be spoken in my home, because my dad didn't speak Italian. So I learned it from the aunts and uncles, my grandmother. And so it was seen as, if you pick it up, then there's a reason, oh yeah. The real reason, put the superstition aside. The real reason was, I have an affinity for language. And so I speak multiple languages now, but they were like, oh, it's a sign, so we teach them. Some people don't have that affinity for language. So the question I get all the time is, and yes, Marius, I agree with your comment. The question I get at the time is that, do you have to know how to speak Italian or Latin in order to be able to practice Italian witchcraft? And no, you don't have to dress up in any kind of particular clothes. I'm wearing a t-shirt and jeans. In the 13th and 14th century, that might have been robes that looked more like Francis of Assisi. In times before that, that might have been a loincloth. And so a really good question that comes up around those same things, like about what teaching is the question that Marius asked. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for heresy in 1600. Was he also considered a sorcerer, and what are the folk histories about him? And Giordano Bruno was a practitioner of the arts, just like San Expedite and some of the older saints. What you need to know is that anybody in the modern era who claims to be a direct blood descendant of Giordano Bruno is, in the technical terms we would use, is full of shit, because Giordano Bruno was a gay male and he was celibate. But his role, like my role when I was, was still before I retired from being a bishop, was to be able to protect the practitioners of our tradition, and at the same time to be able to teach them and teach them under the radar, so that you're providing a service to the general community. But let's face it, if you were a priest in Italy, most of the people there understood what you were talking about beneath the surface, and you were teaching them in a way that didn't get you persecuted. Giordano Bruno had the chutzpah, the balls, the whatever you want to call it, to be able to speak out and say, let's make science come first. Yeah. And so that the question people will always ask, well, isn't that in contradiction to Italian folk magic? And the answer is no, because all of our, all you have to do is talk to your local naturopath, and they'll tell you, wow, these practitioners of African and Italian and Sicilian folk magic were using plants that medicines are made from today.
Yep.
So it's science-based.
Yeah. Yeah. And, speaking of, just to kind of backpedal a little bit, speaking of language, I think we have to talk about it. We have to talk about specific words and what they mean, because I feel these words get interchanged so much without understanding what they mean and what they are. And that is the word, and correct me if I'm saying it wrong, Stregoneria. Say it again.
Stregoneria.
Stregoneria. I'm Hispanic, so that's how I say it, right? And strega. So people confuse these words all the time, but there is a very big difference. Can you explain that difference to us?
I think you might mean, well, strega just means witch. Stregoneria is witchcraft. And then I think you may be asking about Stregaria.
Stregaria, yes. Yeah.
So Stregaria is a completely made up religion, as most religions are, that was made up and created by Raven Grimassi, and then contributions were made in truth or allegedly by people like a close personal friend of mine, Dr. Leo Martello, and Lori Bruno, and people like that. So it's a folk religion that basically, and really, when you boil it down, and I had the opportunity to have conversations with Raven Grimassi, and I want to be really clear, while I disagree with a lot of what he said, his position did change over time, number one. And secondly, I had a conversation with him. He was a very kind, very compassionate man, very willing to say when he made mistakes, and very willing to say, I'm sorry if you thought something was culturally insensitive. But essentially what he and his cohorts did was they took Wicca and they threw Parmesan cheese and oregano on it and called it Stregaria. So Stregaria is witchcraft with Italian seasoning. Stregoneria is Italian folk magic, what we would refer to as witchcraft. But a lot of what, just like in the United States and in England, a lot of what was called Stregoneria was called that by the church. It was called that by the oppressor. And so sometimes it really was. I mean, there were people A woman could give birth, and by the way, for your viewers, if you haven't watched Luna Nera on Netflix, watch it, because there's some really good historical context to a really well-written story there. But if a woman gave birth and the baby was stillborn, the church might call that Stregoneria, that the midwife somehow put a curse on that baby. When the baby might have strangled from the umbilical cord. When a baby was born with what we say in Italian with the veil, with High-Lane's membrane disease, in medical terms, they would say, oh, that child was born a witch. No, that child was actually just born with a membrane, on there. Now in our tradition, we do believe, and my sister was born with the veil, my baby sister, we do believe that those people are born more sensitive, that there is something special about them.
It's the same. It's the same in my culture too, with the veil. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't deny it when you see it and you say, oh, there's so and so. She does divination, or this one, talks to the dead. Someone asked earlier, does Stregoneria or Italian folk magic deal with working with the dead? We almost exclusively do that. So we consider what you might call in America gods and goddesses to be the most ancient of our ancestors. So we might call them, in my tradition, we would say the old ones. And so you've got the oldest of the ancestors. That includes Diana, Lucifer, Aradia, the Black Madonna, which is Isis. You would have that, and then you would have the spirits of the particular land that we work with. The elemental spirits, the Pala in the north, the Setiano Setiani in the south, the Bellarie in the east, and the Mani in the west. We work with them, and in each of those categories, there are groups of spirits that we work with, and then the ancestors. And we really do feel like all of those spirits, all of that, the spirits in the house, the Lingetti and the Lada, that we're all part of one family, that we're all part of one, if I were to be very postmodern about it, that we're part of one creative intelligence or universal mind, and that this whole experience of life is almost holographic. And so we'll allow that fire truck to go by. So this whole experience of life is really holographic, and it's an opportunity for us to get to see reflected back to us what's going on. And
as we talk a little bit about the language too, and as you're saying some of the names of these gods, spirits, demigods, ancestors, they're sounding very and like Mary said, kind of Romani in like the terms. Is there any crossover with Romani culture?
Yeah, without question. I mean, if we look anthropologically, you're going to see that most folk magic traditions originated and have really deep roots in Africa. From Africa, you would see them moving almost simultaneously into India and the Mediterranean. And so depending on whether that group of people traveled further south or just east, is going to be where the flavor comes from, but the roots are the same tree. So my mom's family are Hungarian Romani. And so when my grandmother on my mom's side would teach me some of those traditions, I was like, it's just a different language talking about the same thing.
Right.
And using the same thing. And so, some traditions might use playing cards. In Napoli and Abruzzo, they use what looks like regular playing cards to do readings. Others might use tarot cards. Others might have completely different decks, or may use stones or bones. At the end of the day, the roots all come from that same tree, and that tree is a tree that grew in Africa.
Wow. So when you say that your spirits and your gods are almost exclusively ancestral, because I've heard that terminology before, this idea of ancestral, because technically we all come from one divine source, like you had said, and so technically we're all related in that sense. But I always find when I'm interviewing people from different cultures that they do make a distinction between the ancestrals that are like kind of out there in the ether and all that, and the ones that they would consider their actual dead, the ones that are just deceased and like in the cemeteries and stuff, and that there is a difference. Do you have that kind of difference as well, or do you consider them all the same?
Absolutely. So we have like in my personal working, the difference is for me and for the people that most of the people that I know in the tradition, we don't worship the old ones. We work with them. So if we call on Diana, we'll keep it easy for the people so that the ones who are still hanging on to that biblical stuff don't freak out, because Lucifer is not who you think he is. But if I call on Diana to work with her, I work with her like you would a great grandmother. And so if I leave an offering, it's out of gratitude. It's not that because here's the prescribed offering, so you have to leave it or she's going to get mad, because they don't want worship. They want devotion. They want love. They want you to be, part of the family. But the people that I work with most often, and on a daily, more than a daily basis, throughout the day, throughout the night, and when any magical workings that I undertake are the ancestors that you would call the mighty dead. The ancestors of your direct bloodline. And so what was really interesting for me is that there's a mythology in the New Age culture in the West, that when you die, all of a sudden you get enlightened, and so the uncle who was a racist or a homophobe or just a dick, he's suddenly going to be nice and wonderful, and he's going to know all the secrets. Sadly, it doesn't work that way. So the uncle that was a dick is still a dick, but he's on his journey, and that doesn't mean he's stuck being a dick forever.
Right.
And so part of why we really encourage people, and it's part of the course that I teach, to do that ancestral work, is because we believe our job right here, right now, is to do healing work for the ancestors every single day of our lives, because without them, we wouldn't be here. And so you find some crossover, like some of the work that we do is done in the graveyards, and the cemeteries. Some of the work that we do is done at the crossroads. Some of the work that we do is done in places of importance to particular ancestors. And we do that because we have an opportunity to do some of the work to show our gratitude for them. And when you do that, the awesome thing is they grow, they change, they learn, and they seem to learn faster than we do on this plane. So when you need help, they're there to say, hey, you know what? This might be a better way to do this.
I'm curious to know, is there, so right now I've been addicted to TikTok. I just got on it and like I absolutely love it. And one of the trends that I'm noticing is like everyone is like terrified of fairies, right? And in some other cultures, and like when I interview other people as well with their cultures, there's a certain level of fear that is kind of put in when it comes to working with spirits and working with the dead. And there are taboos and certain things that you shouldn't leave and certain things that you should. And the way that you're making this sound with the folk magic that you have going on here is that it doesn't sound like it's being approached with fear, and these taboos are kind of non-existent. It's just it appears, at least, that it's just about love and communion and exchange. Am I off saying that, or are there parts that you should be afraid of?
You're right on. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't spirits or entities that can cause you trouble. It doesn't mean that if you're not doing things correctly that you don't get in trouble yourself, because what we do as witches in our tradition is we work with the energy around people and places, circumstances, and we shift that energy. That's all we do. There is no great secret. It's not that like I have when we had some issues here at the house and our ceiling caved in. I have some 400 and 500-year-old books that were among the first things that I didn't care whether the ceiling was going to fall on me. I knew I had to go and get those things out of that room to protect them. But the magic isn't in the words that's in the books. The magic is in knowing how to use and manipulate that energy, knowing the creative process. So when we look at these spirits, for example, that you said the fae, how people freak out about the fairies, we call those the Bellarie. And so that includes the Linketti, which are like elves, like you would see on Lord of the Rings kind of shows. The Folletti, which are the wind spirits. If you've ever seen the picture of Marilyn Monroe with her dress going up, that was Folletti. That they're very, very playful, very mischievous. The Linketti will affect our dreams, and so, but they're also like very meticulous, very anal retentive, if you want to use a common phrase. So we may take seeds or rice or salt and toss it under the bed if you're having bad dreams. And the reason you do that is because the Folletti will have to count every one of those seeds, but they can't touch them, so they're going to lose count. And or you take, if you're having really bad dreams, you take a piece of your hair and you tie it in knots, and the Folletti will spend all night trying to unknot your hair without being able to touch it.
So basically, they're a Fae Virgo.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like me. That sounds like how I would
exactly. And then we have, you have some other, like the water nymphs. They could be good or bad, depending on what your intentions are. So it's all about the energy and intentionality that you bring to that moment, to that working. And so it's like looking in broad strokes at some of the questions, that people are asking. Yeah, we do workings in the cemeteries. We do workings at the crossroads. There is definite crossover among a lot of the folk magic cultures, and that isn't to say that they all came from exactly the same place, but the roots again come from that African tradition. And so what happens is, as that tree grew, some of those branches moved into the direction of religion. So you have more structured things that, okay, you only give this particular spirit or god or Orisha this offering, and that's the only thing that they'll accept. And if that's what you're taught and that's what you do, that's your relationship with that particular Orisha. I can tell you that, and even as an Italian, I work with some of the Yoruba and Santeria Orishas. They're because they're my ancient ancestors. And they've done tremendous things that have, from the time I was a little kid. So I could never turn my back on them. But I color outside the lines. And so if all I have, with one particular, and I don't like to talk about the particular the relationships particularly. So forgive me for this, but with one particular one who is everything to me, is the closest thing to as a polyamorous gay male, he's practically, I would say, in the realm of a lover. He's so beloved to me, so intimately involved. I have coffee with him every morning. I don't give the traditional offerings because our relationship is we sit down first thing in the morning and we have coffee. So if you're looking at this for the first time, yeah, I teach a class. There's 26 weeks, the first segment. And then for those who I feel are ready, then there's another 26 weeks that begins the next part of the journey. But the purpose isn't for you to become Gianmichael fans and followers. I love fans and followers on social media, but in real life, I want family. And so the purpose is for me to become obsolete. And for you to say, I'm on a magical journey and it's all mine, and nothing that anyone else can say is going to change that. And I have to experience it. So nothing that you experience it can be dictated by somebody else. You should question everything that you heard me say today and find out what your experience is, because if your experience is different, there's a reason it's different. It's your journey.
Mm-hmm. I agree 150%. Honestly, with that, I'm going to close it. I think that was like a beautifully well said closing statement. So Dr. Gianmichael, can you tell everyone how they can reach you? You can buy all of his books on Amazon. He has a gazillion books. Your website, your email, if you want to share, Facebook if you want to share, YouTube channel if you want to share. Let people know how they can get to you.
Sure. Let me say first, I will actually go through the comments to tonight's show when I get back in front of the computer a little bit later. And so anybody that asks questions I didn't get to, I promise I will do my best to answer those because I want people to know that they're heard and they're seen, and I value that. But you can reach me. The easiest way to reach me and connect with me across all platforms is to go to www.inneralchemy.online. It's not .com, so it's .online. And no, I don't know how to say on.
I was gonna say it.
So it's ONLINE is what I'm saying. Because somebody said online. What's that?
Are you sure you're not from New York? You sure?
I spent a lot of time there. I spent a great deal of time right around the corner from the Stonewall. I lived upstairs from the Duchess, from a lesbian bar, and across from Tiffany's Diner.
Yes.
So I do have that half a cup of the city, half a cup of Philadelphia, and I'm, depending on who you ask, my inner child was either a little black girl who's now an angry black woman, or an old Jewish woman. Either way, same difference. So find me at inneralchemy.online, or you could go on Facebook and just look up Gianmichael Salvato. Don't put doctor in there, because then you'll see my clinical practice, and that's then you won't connect with me. I accept friend requests from anyone who messages me, and I will go through. There's some great questions here that we probably didn't cover. I'll go through those later on tonight. I promise before the night's over, I will get back to everybody.
Gianmichael, thank you so much for saying yes to me. This was so much fun. I feel like we need to do it again and do like a 201 version. This was definitely a 101, some history, some language. Let's get some basics out of the way. But for sure, this was beautiful. Thank you so much for spending the night with me tonight.
It was my pleasure. And we on every other Tuesday, we have a program called the Masca and the Mystic with my beautiful co-host, Andrea Savar, where we talk about Italian folk magic and the mystical traditions, the healer's path. And then on the in-between weeks, I do something called the Holistic Mystic, which just literally means that I don't know what I'm going to talk about until the day before. Until the hour before I go live. So it might be political, it might be magical, it might be spiritual. It's just, okay, here's kind of how we take the magical practice and convert it into everyday life, so that we're living as activists, we're living as peacemakers and wayseers.
For sure. You guys in the chat room, I let's give a quick shout out to a few people. There was a lot of people here tonight. Marius, of course, Mystical Misty, Celinda, De Los Santos, Peggy, Jen, Lucianne, Valerie, oh my gosh, Tamira, Susie, Tony. There's so many people here. Oh my goodness. Let's see who else. Val. Let's see who else. And Mel, you guys, thank you so much for spending your Saturday night with us, hanging out with us. Again, Gianmichael, thank you so much. Jenny, thank you so much. And you guys have a wonderful night. Make sure you join us next week. And I love you all. From The Magical Solution, this is Leilani and Gianmichael Salvato. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Bye, guys.